Hey there, YouTube. So let's start with a story, kind of a composite. Obviously, I'm not going to tell stories about individual students, but let me give a sense of some of the students I work with every day. Um, so when our students come in, one of the big things many of them will complain about is that we don't have breakfast for them until 10 a.m. Okay, so they've got morning meeting at 9. Um, we have our literature circles that start around 9:20, 9:25, and then 10 a.m. we open up the kitchen for them so they can grab cereal or some snacks or chips, things like that. And one of the hardest things for me is the fact that we have students coming in every day where the first food they are getting is that 10 a.m. snack. We're we're literally we're giving them the food that we get from the food pantry. Um, and I'm glad that our school does this. Um, and we also have a hot lunch every day provided by a local car manufacturer. Um, and it's it's really frustrating because I look at my own son and I will not let him out the door to school unless he's eaten something. And there have been mornings where I have grabbed crackers or tortilla, or I've grabbed cheese and a tortilla, excuse me, and handed it to him when he's in his car seat and made him eat while I'm driving him to school as fast as I can to get him there. All right? Because I'm a teacher. I know that people don't learn as well when they're hungry. I don't learn very well when I'm hungry. My attitude on a day without breakfast is typically not my best. And and yet I have students who are not coming from that kind of privilege. They're not coming from households where their parents are making sure they eat before they leave for school. Um, and some of my students, they get to their morning meeting at 9 a.m., but they may have an hour on the bus to get to us. And I mean public transportation, because our the school I'm at, we don't have busing. We're not a typical school. And and so one of the things that I imagine is very frustrating for these students is they come to us and their whole lives they've been told that they have potential, or they've been told that they're squandering that potential, or some of them have outright been told that they don't have potential. And by the time they get to us, you know, when you tell these students who are accustomed to being hungry, who are accustomed to not having adults who care about them, when you tell these students, hey, you need to do well in school because that's how you're going to get the good job, they just look at you and they think you're crazy. They um, when I want my students to believe that they can have a better future than being a cashier at a grocery store, some of my students they probably think I'm dissing their families, because many of them come from families where, cashiers, that's decent work, and it's not easy work. You go in at all kinds of random hours. Grocery stores like to be open late. Um, you can work full time at a grocery store and still qualify for food stamps and still need food stamps just to put a meal on the table at night. Assuming you even have hours that let you get home in time to see your kids before they go to bed. And so when I work with students coming from backgrounds like this, I don't think it's helpful to do the whole like motivational type speech. Phrases like, your attitude determines your altitude. It sounds like BS if you're hungry. If you tell someone to, like, reach for your dreams, I mean, that sounds delusional when every other adult in your family has been struggling to survive, you know, sometimes for generations. Um, and I know there are going to be a lot of folks out there who are going to say, like, who are going to, like, I mean, there are a lot of people out there who complain, saying things like critical race theory is BS, or they'll say that, like, structural racism doesn't exist, and the fact is that we have many students out there whose, you know their families have not had an opportunity to accumulate the kind of wealth or the kind of opportunities to even be aware of what's out there. Um, and yes, I can honestly say that there are students of all races who live in poverty, and I can honestly say that no one narrative fits every student. But what I can say is that disproportionately, students of color are facing larger problems because the racist policies of the past meant that their grandparents, and in many cases their parents, were not allowed to do things like purchase homes in nice neighborhoods. Right? There were laws, redlining, that specifically barred individuals who weren't white from buying homes in nice areas. And it is true that I have met some students who are white whose families are not really any better off. But the thing that we have to bear in mind is that, the legacies of our country, between racism and policies that specifically punish people for being poor, by the time the students, the children of this society reach my classroom, they know better than to believe in the American dream that I've lived. Okay? Now, for me, like, I didn't hit all my dreams. I went to school for engineering and ended up in English. I joined the Army and ended up medically discharged. I went to grad school for writing and ended up a teacher. And so, my life is not at all a straight line path. when you think about it, I actually have not reached any of the dreams I initially set out for. But I am living the American dream in that I have the income to raise my son and to feed him well and to make sure he can go to the doctor whenever he needs to. Whereas I have students who come in who don't have health insurance. I have students who come in with like an ear infection. We'll ask them like, "Hey, have you been to a doctor yet?" And they're like, "Well, no, I don't have a doctor." For some of these students, like going to urgent care is a big deal because they don't necessarily have $120 on hand to pay to be seen and maybe get some antibiotics. And it's really hard knowing what to say to my students who are in this position. Because for me, no, I don't have a ton of money. But I don't have a ton of student loans. My car is paid off. No, I don't have a house. I live in an apartment, but if my son has an earache, he has a pediatrician and they will get him in the same day. I have a job where I can take off work to take care of things. Like next week and the week after, I'm going to be taking paid time off, recovering from a recent surgery. And many of my students, they the jobs that they and their parents have don't allow that kind of flexibility. And I've had periods in my life where I didn't have PTO time. I've had periods where you either showed up for work or you just didn't get paid. And those were hard times for me, but they were temporary. And I knew they were temporary. Whereas for my students, a lot of them see themselves as being, they kind of see themselves as kind of fated to, at best, work hourly minimum wage jobs if they're lucky. They see that as being lucky. And so when I think about this, a key message I want teachers to be aware of is that with many students, you can't assume that the teaching strategies that motivated you as a student are going to work for your students. Okay, for example, I liked school. That's part of how I ended up in teaching. I liked school enough that I went on to grad school and paid for that by teaching. And I get to, the job I have is one of the most comfortable things I've known in my life. It's school. I love school. And for many of my students, on the other hand, school has been, one of the worst experiences of their life. School has been the place where teachers remind them on a daily basis that they can't keep up with their peers. School has been the place where, they get a failing grade on a math test and the teacher says, "Oh, you need to try harder." Well, how do you try harder when you go home and dinner is a bag of chips? How do you try harder when you were up half the night caring for your own sibling because your parents were both at work trying to make ends meet? And I'm not even going into situations of like abuse or drug dealing or gun violence, the like the kinds of traumas that everyone knows and recognizes would be traumatic. I'm talking about the daily experiences of students who have families that are trying to survive and are not, they're not being taken care of by this system that we have. And so when working with students in this position, I think it's really important that we don't act like we have the answers for them. We shouldn't be acting like you're either working to go to college or you're nothing. No, we need to let students know, hey, there are trade programs out there. And right now, there's a huge labor shortage in the trades. There are tremendous careers out there in computer science where you can get a 6-month certification that will open all kinds of doors. And when we phrase it to our students, we shouldn't be phrasing it as, oh, if you only worked harder. We should be phrasing it as, yeah, life sucks. Like, let's do what we can to get you out of this. So that's just my kind of 2 cents worth. I meant this to be a very different kind of video. I meant to kind of talk a bit more about strategies and things you can say to offer encouragement, or at least some camaraderie. But I couldn't make that video work. And so I think it's more important that whoever you are as a teacher, when you are working with students, understand that you may not know what struggles they're going through. And many of the students who are suffering the most are also the best at hiding it. And so what I really encourage every teacher to do is to, before you go and tell students how much better things can be or how much harder they should try, or what their dreams can be, I think it's important to first ask your students what do they see as their future, because that will give you a lot of insight. Many students will say they don't have dreams. Many students will say that, oh, I'm just going to get a job at the grocery store, or I'm just going to make a bunch of money, because no one's ever told them what else is out there. So yeah, with that, I'm gonna sign off. Hopefully, this gives some ideas, or at least generates some perspectives. But yeah, I wish I had better answers than I do. If you have thoughts on this, please post them in the comments, and I will post more videos soon.